Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks, and today I am here with a ranter review. This is going to be a mostly positive review today, and boy do I have a lot to talk about for such a short book. I'm going to be reviewing The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This was originally published October 30th, 2007. The translation of this book was the winner of the Booker Prize in 2016. This falls into the genres of literary fiction and horror, and it is currently rated at a 3.59 on Goodreads. Before we dive into this book, I do want to talk about the trigger warnings on this book because they are abundant. There is trigger warnings for violence, gore, medical trauma, sexual assault, confinement, mental illness, and abuse. If you are sensitive to any of those topics, take them seriously because they all play heavily throughout this story. It's not a brief mention. They are pretty significant plot points in the book. So we have our main character, Young-hee. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And she lives with her husband. She starts to have really bloody, gory nightmares, and they're really disturbing to her. So disturbing, in fact, that she decides she's going to throw away all the meat in her house and become a vegetarian. At the time in South Korea, this was considered a very scandalous type of a thing. This was not normal. Basically, the only people that are referenced as being vegetarian within this book are monks. And so when she starts throwing away all this meat and refusing to cook meat for her husband, he is very, very shocked by her actions. He informs her family, and it becomes like a big scandal within the family. And we see the story through multiple perspectives as different family members try to force Young-hee to consume meat. The more that the family pushes, the more that Young-hee refuses, and the more that her actions become more and more extreme. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about this book is that this book is told in 3 different POVs. We get the first part of the book, which is told by her husband, the second part of the book, which is told by her brother-in-law, and the third part of the book, which is told by her sister. So we have this whole exploration of Young-hee and her decision not to eat meat, except we never actually hear anything about it from her herself. I think this was interesting because we can't really trust how Young-hee's actions are interpreted because each person that's viewing her story has a different perspective and is possibly trying to get something different out of the story. For me, the central theme of this book is power and control over one's own body. And we see Young-hee, who initially decides she doesn't want to eat meat. And that's a pretty basic decision, and everybody freaks out, right? Everyone wants to force her to eat meat, and they're trying to do it in particularly brutal ways. There is a scene where her father physically tries to shove meat in her mouth, like hits her and tries to force food down her throat. There's another really prominent scene where her mother is cajoling her and harassing her to drink what she calls an herbal remedy, and as soon as Young-hee drinks it, she rushes into the bathroom and vomits it all up. There's multiple scenes where medical staff in a mental institution are strapping her down to a bed and forcing tubes down her throat and her nose, or injecting stuff into her to try to force her to consume nutrients. All of these things are against Young-hee's will. She is clear. She doesn't want to eat meat, and at the point in the book where there's medical intervention, she's made her wishes amply clear. I won't go into them for the sake of spoiling the big reveal, but in all 3 of these instances, Young-hee has been very clear about what she wants, and then everybody has ignored it and forced her to do what they want instead. It becomes a competition between the person that's responding to her and their comfort versus her actual physical needs. And I thought that was a really interesting positioning. I think that the thing that I took from this book is that society doesn't allow women a lot of bodily control. So we have this physical violence around the food and trying to force her to eat things that she doesn't want to consume. And then we have some scenes within the book that have questionable sexual acts. So the reason that I say questionable is because it depends on your interpretation of Young-hee's mental status. If you believe that she's in control and she knows what's going on and she's making rational decisions, then the sexual experiences are uncomfortable, but they're not necessarily sexual assault. But if you think that she's mentally ill and you read her as a mentally ill person, then she is being raped. And so between these questionable sexual situations and this physical violence directed at her dietary choices, I felt like this entire book was kind of a metaphor for women and having their bodily autonomy taken away from them. This whole book is literally about Young-hee and her loss of power and loss of control over her own life. everybody but her is allowed to make decisions. Everybody but her is allowed to speak about her life and how they perceive her life and how they perceive what she's doing as wrong or insane. And I thought that this was really interesting that from the outside, like if you just looked at Young-hee's actions like on paper, not the going vegetarian part, but like the more extreme actions that occur towards the end of the book, you would think that she's suffering from a mental illness. You would think that she's lost the plot completely, honestly. But the way that it reads in the story, it almost reads as an act of defiance or social protest. Like she just wanted to be a vegetarian and nobody could accept that choice. And so now she's just going to go more extreme and more extreme and more extreme to fight the patriarchy and fight the powers that are like trying to control her. It's like almost this explosive rebellion against the societal norms. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if that was necessarily the intent, but that's the way that it felt for me. And one of the other things that I thought was really interesting is, as this book, like I said, talks about power and control over one's body and control over one's choices, we're again seeing this whole story from everybody except Young-hee's perspective, which further strips Young-hee of power, because she didn't have the power to make her dietary decisions. She didn't have the power to make her medical decisions. She didn't have the power to dictate how her life would play out. And now she doesn't even have the power to dictate her own story. We see it only through the eyes of other people. It's like a final slap in the face or further victimization of her at the end. And to go a little further on that theme of like the way that the story is told, further victimizing Young-hee and taking her power away by not even allowing her to tell her story, I think it's even more interesting that the first two perspectives that we see are from men, from her husband and her brother-in-law. So we're not even seeing this perspective from a female lens, somebody else that's experiencing a power dynamic that's imbalanced, but we see it from, in this case, the privileged class, the male, who is telling her story for her and telling us like how they view her and rationalizing their behavior based on her behavior. It's a really, really interesting thing to think about. And this last little bit here is going to have some potential spoilers for the very end of the book. If you don't want to spoil the final reveal, then check the timestamps in the description and you could just skip past this little section. The third perspective is Young-hee's sister. And the thing that I think is interesting is she starts out this process enraged towards her sister. She's complicit in trying to force her to eat. She's complicit in trying to make her normal and, make her fit societal standards. And she's filled with rage at the fact that her sister isn't complying. She is not visiting her sister at the mental hospital. She's not really involved in her care. And when we finally see her go visit her sister, she's shocked by the condition that her sister is in. And it's not until there's an extremely catastrophic situation and the sister In-hee is literally forced to let Young-hee go that we realize all of her feminine rage, all of this anger that she's been directing at her sister is because she sees herself in her sister. She sees a reflection. It's like looking into a mirror. She feels rage at the societal standards that are placed upon her. She has dealt with suicidal thoughts. She has dealt with feeling like she doesn't belong in this society. And she feels angry because she doesn't have the ability to let go in the way that Young-hee did. I thought that that was a brilliant piece of writing to basically make her complicit in this ostracization and bullying and torture of her sister, essentially, only to find out at the very end that she deep down secretly has been sympathizing and empathizing with her the whole time. She's just too scared to admit it because she's basically seeing, hey, if this happened to her for this subversive choice, then what's going to happen to me? And at the end of this review, I just wanted to address the Goodreads rating on this book. So this to me is a bit of experimental fiction. It's told in a unique format. It's about an unusual concept, and it explores some really uncomfortable themes in kind of a chaotic way. So typically when I read experimental fiction, I've noticed that there's only two responses. People either love it or they hate it. There's not like a lot of middle ground. And so I feel like that's going to be the case here with this book. It's probably going to be very polarizing. I think very few people are actually rating it 3 stars. I think a lot of people are probably rating it 5 stars and a lot of people are probably rating it 1 and 2 stars, just because you either vibe with the book or you don't. Like, it's not something you can kind of just mosey through, if that makes sense. It's uncomfortable. It's an awkward book. It makes you feel icky in a lot of ways, but some people really like that awkward, uncomfortable ickiness that makes you think, and some people just don't like to feel awkward and uncomfortable. They don't get the concept of the book, and that's okay. Not everything is for everyone, but I think that's why you end up with a book like this that won the International Booker Prize that has a 3.5 rating. So that's the end of the review. I hope that you enjoyed hearing my somewhat cobbled together thoughts. I hope that they made sense. I tried my best to make them understandable, but I don't always succeed in that. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and comment down below. What was the most difficult book you've ever read? And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button down below as well as the notification bell. And that way you never miss any of my videos and we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.